Welcome to this short talk about the flipped classroom. Now, there's been lots written about the flipped classroom and lots of discussion around this and some controversy. What I want to do here is take you through a case study from my own practice and sort of outline how I've done this, the benefits, some of the potential pitfalls, and really just try and spark some ideas for your own practice, and maybe you'll consider using some of these things, or maybe none of this will be appropriate to your own practice, but maybe it'll spark some different ideas. So the learning objectives for this talk are for you to reflect on your practice and consider whether the ideas presented could be adapted to support your students' learning and development, and to consider how to overcome the potential barriers to implementing these approaches in your own practice. So by way of introduction, the case study I'm going to be talking about involves a range of differentiated teaching resources and active learning environments that I've devised and deployed in order to create a rich and immersive learning journey for my students. The approach used has been deployed for a second year analytical science module taken by students on a range of different degree courses, and the topics are a bit technical: chemometrics, thermal analysis, thermal methods, electroanalysis and colorimetric analysis. Now, I don't particularly want to get bogged down in these topics because I think the concepts and the ideas that I'm trying to get across transcend these specific topics. Bit of theory then. This is Bloom's taxonomy for the cognitive domain, and traditional approach with traditional lectures and tutorials in the class time we're sort of tending to target the lower order thinking skills. We're getting the material across. It's about remembering, understanding, maybe a bit of application, but in general we're leaving the higher order thinking skills for private study, for students to develop those. The flipped approach is about using private study to get the material across, and the lower order thinking skills being tapped into there, and then really freeing up time in the classroom to really focus on developing the higher order thinking skills. So in terms of lectures and tutorials, these have been around for a very long time. I've said in a previous video that they're probably here to stay. Here's a picture from the University of Bologna in the mid 14th century. The lecturer's reading from the book and the students are copying down what he's saying, and there are arguments around whether that's a really effective way of teaching or not, because there is new technology now. We've got the printing press, we've got the internet. Lectures are no longer the only means for transmitting knowledge to our students. So whilst the use of lectures and tutorials are likely to continue, the point I want to make here is now that these are only two possible learning activities amongst many. And which other learning activities am I talking about? Well, there's a whole host of resources and approaches that I've put together into this module, and I'm going to go through each of these in turn and explain a bit about each. So in terms of peer instruction, just in brief, students are voting on questions during the lecture. They also discuss their answers with each other and take a second vote, and this is all about getting peer-to-peer interaction, students being able to sort of get feedback on what they're understanding. Here's a sort of question that I might put up with the voting results from the second vote or the first vote. I can't quite remember which, but this gives you a bit of an idea of what pops up on the screen. And I give my students voting pads, or they can use the mobile app to respond to the questions that I'm setting. So as I've just mentioned, voting pads, but also now more recently using the app to assess student learning during the lectures. It encourages active learning during the lecture, and it provides the students with instant feedback about what they're understanding, what they're not understanding. It also allows me to see what sort of pace I need to go at, what do I need to slow down on, what do I need to emphasise, which bits can we quickly move on from. It's facilitating this peer-to-peer learning and encouraging a more discursive approach to learning, where the students are active participants in the learning process, and it's helping me as the tutor and the students individually to identify areas that require further attention. In terms of screencasts, these can be used for supporting a number of different areas. So for example, I help my students to prepare for lab work, to undertake various bits of lab work. Now in other disciplines this might be to help them prepare to go and do some field work, or to go out and do some surveys or interviews. They can also be used for explaining difficult concepts, so you can have a video focused on one concept, and so I've used some videos to explain particular scientific principles that underpin different analytical techniques, but this could be applied more generally to various different concepts. And they can also be used for teaching students how to use software. So for this particular module, I demonstrate how to use Excel to do some advanced data analysis. I've used them with some success in other areas to teach quite complicated software that gets used in industry. And with software, there's often click by click, 7 clicks to do one thing, and if you forget one of those, then you've had it. So the benefits of this is it's self-paced. You can pause it, you can rewind it, and you can really sort of actually follow in terms of using software, you can go at your own pace and actually dig into using the software at the same time as learning about it. You can also use your screencast to familiarise yourself of key concepts in advance of class, and they can also be used to recap and revise material after the class. Learning objectives help to summarise the key knowledge, the concepts that the students need to get from the material that they're engaging with, and for each topic there's a set of learning objectives, and these all build up to the more generalised learning outcomes of the module. Some examples shown there. Reading assignments are something that I've had quite a bit of success with different students on different courses and across different years, so first year, second year, final year. They're highly structured in as far as I set a specific text, even specific pages, and I give specific learning objectives. And I say, look, you need to make notes against these learning objectives from this reading material. Those notes then get uploaded and unlock a test. The test gets adaptively released, and it's typically worth a small percentage of the module. So it's low stakes in terms of the percentage of the marks that this is worth. I make it clear to the students that the notes aren't going to be marked, but I want evidence of engagement. I want to see that they've engaged with this reading assignment. And I also point out that if they upload a blank document or gobbledygook, they're going to get 0 for that test, because I will check them. And also we can review those notes and make it clear that we can review those notes. If they don't get a good mark in the test, they can come and see me. We can look at whether there was enough detail in there. So really these are about familiarising students with material in advance of the lecture and just reinforcing what they're learning during the lectures as well. Online tutorials, these are designed to reinforce key concepts, and it's based on the concept of assessment for learning. It says of learning there, but that's incorrect. It's assessment for learning, and they provide instant feedback and model answers, allowing misconceptions to be corrected. And because these quizzes are drawn from banks of questions, they get a slight variation each time, so they can be taken over and over again. And they can't just get the right answer by recording the right answers from the previous previous attempt, because there'll be different variations on the theory questions, on the calculation questions, and the students always keep the highest score from the attempts that they make. And these seem to have a really good effect in terms of student attainment and feeding forward to the exam. Gamification, I also award badges, medals to students based on performance in the online tutorials, and there's lots been written about gamification of learning and the associated benefits, and the aim here is really to increase the motivation and engagement with the material. So I have had examples of students said to me, look, I had gold on 5 of the online tutorials, but on one of them I had bronze and it really annoyed me, so I went back and got gold. So it's a bit of an add-on. I don't tell the students about these in advance, I just let them discover them, and it seems to work well. It might not be for everyone, but if it helps to motivate some students, then brilliant. In terms of impact on learning, the first 4 years of me teaching this module, the students were doing worse on my half of the module. So this is the exam results for 2 halves of the module. I teach one half, my colleague teaches the other half. So the control side of this, that half of the module has stayed the same in terms of what's been taught and the person who's taught it and the way it's been taught, and so I've used that as the control against my differentiated active learning side of the module. And when I was just delivering with lectures, tutorials, e-notes, the students were doing significantly worse on my half, and that's based on a paired t-test analysis of these marks, so they're getting lower marks and it was statistically significant. And then I introduced screencasts, reading assignments, peer instruction, learning objectives, and I was able to close the gap. This year there was no, so in 12-13, that academic year, there was no statistically significant difference between the results. So that was really nice because it showed that they'd caught up. There was a bit of a blip the year after, but then in 14-15 I had the introduction of online tutorials, gamification, and you can see that things have even taken off even more, that they're actually now doing better on my half of the exam, and again that is statistically significant based on a paired t-test. So some feedback, there's always lots of positive stuff that students say about this, but they find the approach refreshing. They found the voting pads a useful way to interact. They liked having the pre-lab material to be able to work through that independently. The online tutorials always get a lot of positive feedback because it's providing this instant feedback, and so they can go back through things, see where they've gone wrong and actually improve. They actually enjoy coming to the lecture, having an idea of what the topic's going to be about. I know some people are precious about not actually telling the students about what it's going to be about, and not wanting them to sort of decide not to attend once they know, but actually I found this really beneficial, and students come along feeling like they're ready to engage because they've got some idea of what it's going to be about and understood perhaps some of the key terms, and they're ready to access the learning. So I think that's really positive. That last comment is about using some of the peer instruction, and that really helped them to understand some really complicated calculations that they would normally be a bit put off by. So some concluding thoughts. I would recommend just to try one thing. If you're thinking about changing your teaching, try one thing for one session. Don't try and completely change your whole module, but just try one thing at a time. I would suggest providing some materials in advance of the lectures for students to review. I wouldn't make this a requirement because then not all of them are necessarily going to do it unless perhaps it's got some marks associated with it. But you can provide that material in advance and say, look, if you want to familiarise yourself with what we're going to be going over, then here's the stuff that you can look at. And I think that then helps students to access the learning during the lecture time. And I would say as well that making these new resources takes a lot of time. It's a bit of an investment, but it is worth the investment. Once you have them, you can use them year on year, and you can just add a little bit every year to your module and just slowly sort of add to things. You can see that that's the approach that I took with this module. So some discussion points, some things to reflect on. Could you use or adapt or implement any of the resources or approaches that I've described? Are you already using some of these differentiated learning resources and approaches, but maybe now you've got a name for them, or now you've got some ideas of how to take them further? And also, what are the barriers to you actually implementing this? How can they be overcome? So this is something for you to reflect on, maybe discuss with colleagues, but I do hope that this has been useful and that maybe you can take this forward in your own teaching practice. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you found it useful.